I once believed that family was sacred, a bond unbreakable and steadfast. But everything changed the day my son, David, made a simple mistake. He forgot to end our weekly call. And in that unguarded moment, I heard the truth. I'll never forget the sound of my granddaughter Iris's voice, as clear as day. Did she fall for it? She asked. And my son's response, laced with bitterness, hit me like a physical blow. God, I'm tired of pretending to care about her stupid garden club. Then, as if I wasn't even there, my grandson Tyler added, once we get her to sign over the house, we can dump her somewhere affordable. And David, my only child, laughed. Mom's too stupid to see what's really going on. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, my teacup suspended in midair. 5 years of nagging suspicion suddenly snapped into a sharp, painful focus. It was as if the pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving finally fell into place. That night, I blocked their numbers. The next morning, I canceled their credit cards. By the end of the week, I had called my lawyer. When they showed up at my door, frantic and demanding answers, I remained silent. They wanted an explanation, but the truth was, I no longer cared. Family isn't about blood. At 78, I had finally realized it was time to live for myself. Painting my apartment, once a dull space, in the colors I had chosen, creating a sanctuary that was truly mine. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that reflect the silent strength within us all. Share your thoughts in the comments. Where are you watching from? Have you ever discovered the truth behind someone's words when they thought you weren't listening? How did you react to an unexpected betrayal? I remember the moment everything changed, as if it happened yesterday. It was a quiet day, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, enjoying a warm cup of chamomile tea when my phone rang. It was David, calling for our usual check-in. At 78, I'd grown accustomed to these calls. They weren't exactly warm, but they were regular. My connection to a family I no longer saw often. Hello, David, I said, doing my best to keep my voice even, free from any hints of anticipation. Hey, Mom, he replied, his tone distant and distracted as usual. How are you feeling today? We exchanged pleasantries, the weather, my garden club, his children's latest activities. It was the same surface-level conversation we had mastered over the years. I told him about the new roses I had planted, how Mrs. Abernathy from 2 doors down had complimented my front yard. He made the right noises, though I could tell he was typing away on his computer in the background. And how are the paintings coming along? He asked, a question he always made sure to ask, even though he hadn't seen any of my watercolors in over a year. Oh, just lovely, I answered, pushing aside the sting of his neglect. I'm working on a series of landscapes from the park. The art teacher says I have a good eye for composition. That's great, Mom. Really great, he replied, his words flat and distant. The silence that followed felt heavy, full of unspoken things. I filled it, as I always did, with questions about his work, about Natalie, about the grandchildren. His answers grew shorter, more dismissive. Since Hector passed, my life had become eerily quiet. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to echo through the empty house, a constant reminder of time slipping away. I left the television on for background noise, though I rarely watched. My weekly garden club meetings and watercolor class on Thursdays were my few bright spots in a life that had grown increasingly solitary. But at night, I would wander from room to room, touching Hector's things. His reading glasses were still on the nightstand, and his favorite sweater sat on the back of a chair, a piece of him I couldn't bring myself to part with. The silence now felt different. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty house. It was the deafening realization that my family, the very ones I thought I could rely on, had turned their backs on me. And somehow that was liberating. At 78, I was finally free to choose my own path, one painted with colors that were mine alone. The silence would press in, a heavy weight that filled every corner of the house. And so, I'd reach for one of our old records, the ones we used to play on Sunday afternoons, when the house was filled with laughter and the sound of Hector's voice. Alone in the living room, I would sway to those familiar tunes, lost in the memories of days long past. Mom, are you still there? David's voice pierced the quiet, pulling me back to the present. Yeah, sorry, dear. Just thinking about what to make for dinner, I answered, my voice betraying nothing of the emptiness that clung to me. You're eating properly, right? Not just tea and toast? He asked, the concern in his voice sounding more like a formality than genuine care. Of course, I lied. Sometimes it hardly seemed worth the effort to cook for just one person. Good. Well, I should get going. Conference call in 5 minutes, David said, a slight edge in his voice, signaling the end of our conversation. Of course, dear, I replied, trying to sound cheerful, though it felt hollow. Same time next week? He asked. Sure thing, Mom. Take care of yourself, he added before the line went silent. I sat there for a long moment, still holding the phone as if some warmth might radiate from it, as if the connection we once had could still be felt. But all that remained was the quiet hum of the house. I sighed and returned to my now lukewarm tea. Outside, the light was fading, the evening shadows stretching across my small garden. Another day had nearly slipped away. I hadn't always been this lonely. There was a time when this house, well, not this house, but our home, had been full of life. Sunday dinners with David, Natalie, and the grandchildren had been chaotic affairs. Hector would be manning the grill, the air thick with the sounds of everyone talking over each other. Iris, so sweet even as a child, would bring me dandelions she'd picked from the yard, her little face beaming with pride. Tyler would follow Hector around like a shadow, learning how to fix things, how to use tools. But that was before the cancer took Hector, before the silence descended, before my family became distant voices on the phone instead of faces around my table. I rinsed my teacup in the sink, and my gaze fell on the calendar hanging on the wall. Garden club tomorrow. A small thing to look forward to, at least. I'd wear my blue cardigan, the one Nia always said brought out my eyes. Maybe afterward, we'd go to that little cafe on Main Street for lunch. My sister was good about checking in on me, though at 83, she had her own health concerns to juggle. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the bathroom mirror. When had I gotten so old? The woman staring back at me wore Hector's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, her silver hair neatly styled in a bob. Her eyes, once full of life, now held the weight of too many years of loss. I barely recognized myself anymore. Just you and me now, I whispered to my reflection, a habit I had developed in the years since Hector's passing. Talking to myself had become the only conversation I had some days. Hector's diagnosis had come like a thunderclap on a clear day. Stage for pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe a year with treatment. We had been planning a cruise to Alaska for our 50th wedding anniversary. Instead, we spent those months shuttling between hospitals, learning medical jargon no one should ever have to know, watching the strongest man I had ever loved fade away before my eyes. David had been supportive at first, visiting regularly, bringing the children to cheer up their grandfather. Natalie had organized a meal train with their church group. But as the months dragged on and Hector's condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. The kids have school, they'd explain. Work is crazy right now. I understood. Life goes on, even when it feels like yours is standing still. In those last few weeks, Hector was barely conscious, morphine keeping the worst of the pain at bay. I spent my nights in a chair beside his bed, holding his hand, telling him stories about our life together. I told him about the day we met at the USO dance in '62, when he was in his crisp uniform and I wore my favorite blue dress. You were the prettiest girl there, he whispered to me one of the few times he was lucid. His voice, though weak, still carried the strength I had fallen in love with. When he finally slipped away, it was early in the morning. I had dozed off in the chair, still holding his hand. I felt the shift before I even opened my eyes, a subtle change in the air as his soul departed. The nurse said it was peaceful, that he hadn't suffered in the end. I wanted to believe her. The funeral was well attended. Hector had been beloved in the community. A volunteer firefighter for 30 years, a league coach, a deacon at our church. People loved him, and that love was evident in the crowded pews, the heartfelt tributes. But all I could think about was the silence that followed. David gave a heartfelt eulogy at Hector's funeral. Natalie took charge of the reception afterward, handling everything with grace. The grandchildren, then teenagers, hovered awkwardly around me, unsure of how to address a grandmother who had suddenly been thrust into the role of a widow. "We'll check on you every day, Mom," David promised as the last of the guests trickled out. "You won't be alone in this." For a while, he kept that promise. At first, I received daily calls, then every other day, then twice a week. Eventually, it settled into the routine of a Sunday afternoon check-in. The Sunday dinners continued for a time, but like everything else, they slowly faded. "Mom, we're taking the kids to the lake this weekend." "Mom, Natalie's parents are in town." "Mom, Tyler has a tournament." Valid reasons, all of them. Life simply goes on. Meanwhile, I rattled around in the empty spaces of our big two-story colonial, a house meant for a family, not a solitary old woman. The stairs became more and more difficult with my arthritic knees. The yard, which Hector had loved tending to, became a burden I could hardly keep up with. The property taxes gnawed away at my fixed income. When David suggested I consider downsizing, it made sense in a practical way, I reflected. "You don't need all this space, Mom," he said, gesturing around the living room where his childhood photos still hung on the walls. "And the equity you've built up could give you a nice nest egg for retirement." That year, the real estate market was strong. The house sold within a week, and the price went well above asking. I found a charming single-story rancher in a quiet neighborhood, one with a manageable garden and no stairs to climb. David helped with the move, sorting through which furniture to keep, what to sell, and what to donate. "What are you planning to do with the proceeds from the house?" he asked one afternoon as we worked through Hector's tools in the garage. "You should talk to a financial advisor to make sure it's working for you." I hadn't really thought about it. "Put it in savings, I suppose," I admitted. David frowned, his face creased with concern. "That's not very strategic, Mom. Interest rates are terrible right now. You should think about investments. Maybe a reverse mortgage on the new place to free up more capital." His concern for my financial well-being touched me deeply. "I'll think about it," I promised. The move was exhausting, but, in a way, liberating. Downsizing meant confronting a lifetime of possessions and deciding what really mattered to keep. I found myself crying over the strangest things. Hector's collection of matchbooks from restaurants we'd visited, the children's height marks on the kitchen doorframe that couldn't be taken with me, and the rose bushes Hector had nurtured so carefully that I had to leave behind. But my new home, though smaller, had its own charm. A bay window that was perfect for my reading chair. A kitchen with updated appliances that made cooking for one slightly less disheartening. A garden shed that I converted into a studio for my painting. I settled into this new routine, this new chapter of life. One I never planned but had to embrace nonetheless. David seemed relieved once I was settled. "This is much more manageable for you, Mom," he said, surveying the compact living space. "And if you ever need help, we're just a phone call away." I believed him then. I had no reason not to. It wasn't until about 6 months after I'd moved into the rancher that I began to sense something was amiss. David called me on a Tuesday, not our usual Sunday. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began without preamble. "Have you updated your will since Dad passed?" The question caught me off guard. "No, I haven't gotten around to it." "Why do you ask?" I replied, somewhat absent-mindedly. David's tone shifted, smooth and casual. "It's just good practice, Mom. Making sure everything's in order. I have a friend, an attorney who specializes in elder law. He could help you streamline everything and make sure your wishes are clear." "Elder law?" I echoed, somewhat taken aback. "I'm not elderly, David. I'm just experienced." I tried to joke, but my voice felt unsteady. David laughed, though it sounded forced. "Of course, Mom, but it's still smart to have everything in order. I could set up an appointment if you'd like." I didn't answer immediately, only offering a hesitant smile. "I'll think about it," I said, trying to dismiss the discomfort that had settled in my chest. The conversation left me feeling uneasy, though I couldn't quite pinpoint why. It lingered in my thoughts for days, a vague, unsettling sensation that wouldn't quite fade. A week later, I received a call from Natalie, a rarity in itself. "Just checking in on my favorite mother-in-law," she said brightly. "David mentioned you might be feeling a bit under the weather." "Did he?" I asked, somewhat surprised. "I'm perfectly fine. I didn't mention any health concerns during our last call. Oh, maybe I misunderstood, Natalie replied quickly, her tone still sweet. How are you feeling? Taking all your medications properly? Eating well? She continued with more probing questions about my routine, my health, and even my finances in a roundabout way. By the end of the call, I felt as though I had been interviewed, rather than having a conversation with family. Then came the grandchildren. Iris, now 22, appeared unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and flattery. Grandma, you look amazing. I love what you've done with your hair, she said, as we sat down for tea in the garden. We caught up on her life. She had dropped out of community college and was between jobs, as she put it, trying to find herself. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. Grandma, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot financially, just until I get back on my feet. Could you maybe help me out? She hesitated, looking embarrassed. $5,000 would cover my rent and expenses for a few months while I job hunt. $5,000 was a significant sum, but she was my granddaughter. She looked so much like David had at her age, with Hector's eyes and my stubborn chin. I wrote the check, feeling a warm glow of being needed, of being useful to my family. 2 weeks later, I saw her in town, shopping bags from expensive boutiques hanging from her arms and a new hairstyle that must have cost hundreds. She didn't see me watching from across the street. Next was Tyler. At 25, he had his father's charm and confidence. It's a tech startup, Grandma, he said, presenting me with glossy printouts featuring graphs and projections. We're developing an app that's going to revolutionize how people shop for groceries. The potential return on investment is huge. It sounded impressive, though I understood little of the technical jargon. But I don't know anything about investing in startups, I confessed. That's why you have me, Tyler said, patting my hand. I wouldn't steer my favorite grandma wrong. 10,000 gets you in at the ground floor. You could double your money within a year. I wrote the check, telling myself it was an investment in my grandson's future as much as my own. But 6 months later, when I casually asked David how Tyler's business was going, he looked momentarily confused. Oh, that didn't work out. These things happen in the startup world. High risk, high reward. The next time I saw Tyler, he was driving a new sports car. Around this time, I met Milos at a community center dance for seniors. He asked me to dance to a Frank Sinatra song, and his old world charm was immediately captivating. Milos was 75, a retired engineer who had immigrated from Serbia in his 30s. His accent was thick, his eyebrows bushier than seemed possible, and his laugh infectious. It was the kind of laugh that pulled you in and made you forget your worries for a moment. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of excitement, as if a small part of me was waking up. But I couldn't shake the feeling that things had shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated, and that unsettling sensation was still there, quietly lingering just beneath the surface. You dance like a much younger woman, Milos said with a smile as we swayed to the music, his voice warm and sincere. Like a spring breeze. It had been years since anyone had flirted with me, and his words made a blush creep up my neck. In that moment, I felt young again, in a way I hadn't since Hector's diagnosis. For the first time in so long, someone was seeing me, not as a widow, but as the woman I was before everything changed. Milos asked for my number, and I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first date was to a matinee at the old theater downtown, followed by coffee at a cafe where he knew the owner, another Serbian expatriate who treated us to homemade pastries. Over coffee, Milos shared stories about his late wife, his children who lived on the West Coast, and his life in Belgrade before coming to America. I, in turn, told him about Hector, about my painting, and about my garden. We discovered a shared love of classical music and historical documentaries. It wasn't long before Milos became a regular fixture in my life. We spent Wednesdays visiting museums, Saturdays enjoying dinner at his condo or my house, and sometimes we ventured out on day trips to coastal towns I had never explored, despite living so close. For the first time since Hector died, I felt truly alive again, seen for who I was, not just as a widow. When I mentioned Milos to David during one of our calls, his reaction was swift and concerning. "Mom, you barely know this guy," he said, his voice laced with worry. How much have you told him about your finances? Nothing, I answered, taken aback. Why would I? We talk about art, music, and travel, not money. You need to be careful, David insisted, his tone now more urgent. There are a lot of scammers out there who target seniors. Lonely widows with savings are prime targets. Milos isn't like that, I protested. He owns his condo outright, has a good pension from his engineering career. He's not interested in my money. But David's warning planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. The next time Milos and I had dinner together, I found myself watching for any signs of deception, any hints that his interest in me might be financially motivated. There were none, but that small shadow of doubt still lingered, clouding the edges of my happiness. Meanwhile, my sister Zania had been observing the growing involvement of my family in my life with increasing concern. They never visited this much when Hector was alive, she remarked during one of our weekly lunches. Now suddenly they're all so interested in your well-being. They're family, I said defensively. They care about me. Zania, 5 years my senior but twice as sharp, gave me a look that said she wasn't convinced. Just be careful, Viv. Not everyone has your best interests at heart, even family. I dismissed her concerns, chalking them up to the natural cynicism that often comes with age. But as the months went by, a pattern started to emerge, one that became harder to ignore. David and Natalie's reaction to Milos went from concern to active hostility. They began dropping by unannounced when they knew Milos would be visiting, creating awkward situations where he would politely excuse himself. We just worry about you, Mom, David would say after Milos had left. You don't really know this man. He's kind and respectful, I insisted. We enjoy each other's company. Men his age are only interested in one thing, Natalie added sharply. And it's not conversation. I was shocked. I'm 78 years old. I think I'm past being taken advantage of that way. The comments continued, subtle digs about his accent, his background, and his intentions. David would call whenever Milos and I had plans, suddenly needing urgent help. Natalie would schedule lunches that conflicted with our outings, forcing me to choose. Then, one day, David crossed the line. Your relationship with this foreigner is disrespecting Hector's memory, he said. I broke down in tears. Your father would want me to be happy, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. Dad would want you to be safe, David countered, his voice firm. The weight of his words pressed down on me, and I made the difficult decision to choose peace over happiness. I ended things with Milos. The hurt in his eyes was unbearable as he whispered, They are wrong about me, but I understand. Family is important. If you change your mind, you know where to find me. With Milos gone, my world shrank to my home, the garden club, and an increasingly demanding family. The visits from my grandchildren always ended with requests. Money for car repairs, graduate school applications, security deposits. I gave what I could, telling myself this was what grandmothers did. Natalie began admiring my possessions during these visits. Hector's pearl necklace, my mother's silver tea service, and our Waterford crystal wedding vase. This would look perfect in our dining room, she'd say, holding each treasure. Bit by bit, my precious belongings seemed to find their way into their home. I justified it, telling myself that they would inherit these things eventually. David's hints about financial difficulties became more direct. Tyler's tuition is stretching us thin. The house needs a new roof. I began writing checks for their expenses, each time receiving less gratitude and facing more expectations. Zania, watching this unfold, grew alarmed. Viv, they're bleeding you dry, she said bluntly. When was the last time they visited without asking for something, she pressed. They're family, I repeated, almost like a mantra. Family helps each other. Family doesn't take advantage, she countered sharply. Hector would be furious. I changed the subject, but in the quiet moments alone in my increasingly bare house, I began to wonder if Zania was right. The months after my breakup with Milos were painfully lonely. I threw myself into painting, spending hours in my garden shed studio, expressing emotions I couldn't put into words. David's calls grew more frequent, but they always seemed to end with financial matters. Maybe we should consolidate your accounts, Mom, he suggested. Natalie and I could help manage things. I started to feel as though I was disappointing them by maintaining my independence. Natalie's interference grew. She started monitoring my medication, suggesting I needed help remembering pills or perhaps someone to check on me daily. I'm perfectly capable of taking my own medications, I insisted. There's no shame in accepting assistance at your age, she replied in a patronizing tone. The grandchildren's visits followed a familiar pattern. Iris would compliment my baking while explaining her latest crisis. I hate to ask, Grandma, but I'm short on rent this month. Tyler would help with house repairs and then mention his car trouble or a credit card debt. Each time, I wrote a check, feeling momentarily needed, but my savings dwindled while their circumstances seemed to improve. Kitchen renovations, new cars, European vacations. Tyler posted photos from Cancun, and Iris arrived with designer handbags. Meanwhile, I cut back on luxuries. Lunches with Zinnia became monthly. I canceled my symphony subscription and started shopping at discount stores. Zinnia grew more direct with her warnings. They show up with empty hands and leave with full pockets, she said, a concerned look on her face. They're going through a rough patch, I defended weakly. Have they ever paid you back for anything? She challenged. The truth was, repayment had never been discussed. Money always flowed one way, never to return. The pattern became glaringly obvious. My family always arrived empty-handed, yet never left without something. The internal conflict was unbearable. My maternal instinct to provide clashed with the growing awareness of exploitation. I thought of Milos more often, remembering his blunt words. You are being, how do you say it, milked like a cow. At the time, I had been offended, but now I wondered if he had simply spoken a truth no one else dared to point one afternoon. As I sifted through old photographs, I stumbled upon one of David as a child, proudly holding up a fish he'd caught with Hector. His smile was wide and genuine, his eyes gleaming with the kind of love and innocence that only a child can possess. I stared at it for what felt like forever, trying to reconcile that joyful boy with the calculating adult he'd become. The constant stress was taking its toll. I could feel it in my body, weight loss, insomnia, and a pervasive anxiety that gripped me every time the phone rang. It was wearing me down little by little. You look exhausted, Zinnia remarked during one of our rare lunches. This situation is killing you by inches. I don't know what to do, I confessed, the words tasting like defeat. They're my only family besides you. Zinnia's response was sharp. That doesn't give them the right to bleed you dry. Hector would never have allowed this. Hector isn't here, I said quietly, and I'm not as strong as he was. Nonsense, Zinnia shot back. You're every bit as strong. You just need to remember that. Her words sparked something inside me. If my family was using me, the fault wasn't mine. I hadn't failed as a mother. I was simply being exploited by people who valued money more than family. Slowly, I began to change my approach. I started saying no to financial requests. I'm afraid I can't help with that right now. The reactions were telling. At first, confusion, then irritation, followed by outright anger. But Grandma, you've always helped before. Iris protested. My circumstances have changed, I replied. I need to be careful with my spending. The calls began to decrease. Visits almost stopped altogether. But David didn't give up. Mom, are you feeling all right? Maybe we should stay a few days, help around the house. I deflected these offers while researching financial protections for seniors and consulting with Zinnia's lawyer friend. I was preparing myself for whatever came next, either capitulating to their demands or forcing them to reveal their true intentions. It was a Wednesday afternoon when David called outside our usual schedule. I was in my studio, working on a watercolor landscape, trying to capture the perfect light filtering through the trees. When the phone rang, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but years of maternal instinct won out. What if it was an emergency? I sighed and answered the call. Hello, David, I said, trying to keep the weariness out of my voice. Hey, Mom, he replied, his tone unusually upbeat. How are you feeling today? We chatted about nothing in particular, weather, my garden club, his children's latest achievements. It was the same surface-level conversation we'd perfected over the years, but there was something in his voice, a barely contained excitement that made me uneasy. Finally, he got to the point. Oh, by the way, Mom, we're planning a special dinner next week for Tyler's birthday. You'll come, won't you? I was surprised by the invitation. It had been months since I'd been included in a family gathering. Of course, I said, genuinely pleased. What can I bring? Just yourself, David said quickly. We're taking care of everything. It's at that new steakhouse downtown, the one Tyler's been wanting to try. That sounds lovely, I replied, mentally calculating what I could afford for a gift. My budget was tighter these days, but a birthday was a birthday. Perhaps a nice shirt or a book on the historical period Tyler had been interested in lately. Oh, and Mom, David added, his voice shifting to that familiar tone, the one that always preceded a financial request. Slightly hesitant, slightly apologetic. Hate to ask, but could you transfer about $300 to Natalie's account? The caterers need a deposit, and we're a bit short this month. I frowned, confused. I thought you said it was at the steakhouse? Yes, he replied quickly. They have a private room for parties. Something didn't add up, but I was too weary, too drained to question it. My mind raced as I weighed the situation, wondering if my instincts were right. Was I being taken advantage of again? That's what needs the deposit, David said, his tone smooth. It didn't quite make sense. Restaurants typically held reservations with a credit card, not with cash deposits, but I let it slide. Of course, Davy, I said, using his childhood nickname. I'll send it right now. Thanks, Mom. You're a gem. Love you. Love you too, dear. I heard him move as if to hang up, but the call didn't end. Instead, I heard shuffling, followed by voices growing clearer, as if he'd put the phone down without ending the call. Did she fall for it? That was Iris's voice, unmistakable, followed by a laugh that sent a chill through me. Hook, line, and sinker, David replied, his voice completely different, hard-edged, contemptuous. God, I'm so tired of these calls, pretending to care about her stupid garden club meetings and those pathetic paintings she does. Well, keep it up, Natalie's voice, now sharp as glass, cut through. The birthday dinner will be perfect. She's been feeling left out lately, so she'll definitely come and bring a gift, probably cash. You know how she is. Tyler chimed in, clueless as always. And we can bring up the reverse mortgage idea again. Dad says with the right pressure, she'll cave. Yeah, Dad's smart, Iris agreed. Once we get her to sign over the house, we can move her into assisted living somewhere affordable. The family home is too valuable to waste on her. She doesn't need all that space. David spoke again, his tone businesslike. We just need to be patient a little longer. The retirement account alone will set us all up nicely. Not to mention Hector's insurance money she hasn't touched. It should be used for family needs, not sitting in some account. Mom's too stupid to see what's really going on. Always has been, Iris added. Just like Dad said, weak and easily manipulated. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, teacup halfway to my lips, as 5 years of suspicious patterns suddenly crystallized into terrible clarity. The family I thought I had, the son I'd raised, the grandchildren I'd adored, had been playing me for a fool. I wasn't a mother, a grandmother, just a checkbook, a resource to be drained and discarded. The revelation hit like a physical blow, knocking the breath from my lungs. I ended the call with trembling fingers, but their laughter, their cruel words, continued to echo in my mind. I sat there, the darkness of evening creeping in, the teacup growing cold in my hands, processing the betrayal, working through stages of grief that felt familiar, yet entirely different from when I lost Hector. This was a different kind of death. The death of illusions, of the family I thought I had, of the love I had believed in, despite mounting evidence to the contrary. It hurt in ways I hadn't known I could still be hurt, a pain that reached beyond the physical, into an abyss of emotional anguish. What had I done to deserve such contempt? Had I been a terrible mother, a disappointing grandmother? Or was this simply who they were? Who they had always been beneath the surface of familial affection? The questions swirled as the night deepened, the house growing quieter, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Hector's clock, the one thing I insisted on bringing from our old home, the steady heartbeat of our life together. What would Hector do in this situation? The question came unbidden, But with it came a sudden clarity. Hector wouldn't have allowed this. He would have protected what we built, ensuring that our life's work wasn't squandered by those who didn't appreciate its value. Not just its monetary value, but the value of the love and sacrifice it represented. As the first light of dawn filtered through the kitchen window, I knew what I had to do. Financial elder abuse often goes unreported because victims feel ashamed or afraid of losing family connections. But I wasn't going to let my family continue using me, not anymore. I would take action to protect myself and the legacy Hector and I had built together. I spent that night in a state of suspended animation, hardly moving from my kitchen chair as darkness fell, and then gradually gave way to the gray light of dawn. The betrayal felt physical, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. I compared this grief to the one I had felt when Hector died and found it both similar and profoundly different. When Hector passed, I lost someone who loved me unconditionally. This time, I was losing people I had believed loved me, only to discover their love was conditional on what I could provide, what I could give, what I was worth to them in dollars and cents. The internal struggle was agonizing. These weren't strangers who had deceived me. These were my son, my grandchildren, my daughter-in-law, people I had loved, nurtured, and sacrificed for. How could I reconcile the David who had sat by my hospital bed after my hip surgery, holding my hand and reading to me for hours, with the David who had called me stupid and weak behind my back? How could I square the memory of Iris as a little girl bringing me dandelion bouquets and handmade cards with the young woman who laughed at the thought of manipulating her grandmother? Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to call David back and demand an explanation, to ask how they could treat me with such callous disregard. But another part of me, perhaps wiser, knew that confrontation would only lead to denials, to gaslighting, to being told I had misheard or misunderstood. No, this required a different approach. This required strategy, not emotion. This required me to be stronger than I had been in years. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across my kitchen floor, I made my decision. I would protect myself, my resources, my dignity. I would not allow them to take anything more from me. Not my money, not my home, not my self-respect. The first call I made was to Zania. Despite the early hour, she answered on the second ring, her voice alert and steady. My sister had always been an early riser. "Biv, is everything all right?" she asked, sensing the urgency in my voice. "No," I replied simply, and then the words poured out of me. Everything I'd overheard, every cruel comment, every calculated plan to separate me from my assets. As I spoke, my voice grew steadier, my resolve stronger. Naming the betrayal aloud seemed to diminish its power over me. Zania was silent for a long moment after I finished, then said, "I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." She arrived within the hour, bringing coffee and her trademark no-nonsense attitude. At 83, my sister was still a force of nature. Her white hair cut in a stylish bob, her posture military straight despite the arthritis that plagued her on rainy days. "I should have listened to you," I said, tears finally flowing as she enveloped me in a fierce hug. "You saw it all along." "Doesn't matter now," she said briskly, setting down her purse and the cardboard tray of coffee cups. "What matters is what we do next." We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd received the devastating phone call, and made a plan. Zania had always been the practical one, the strategist to my dreamer. Now, her clarity of thought was exactly what I needed. "First things first," she said, pulling out a notepad and pen from her purse. "We need to protect your assets immediately. What access does David have to your accounts?" I explained about the shared access I'd given him to monitor my accounts and the credit cards where I'd made him and Natalie authorized users. The joint checking account we'd set up for emergencies was the first thing Zania addressed. Her handwriting was as precise as ever as she made her notes. "All of that needs to be changed today. Right now, if possible," she said, her tone firm. "But what will I tell them?" I asked, still tangled in the web of familial obligation. Despite everything, I was still worried about hurting their feelings. "Nothing yet," Zania replied without hesitation. "We secure your finances first, then decide how to handle the confrontation. Viv, she continued, taking my hands in hers. Her blue eyes, so like mine, so like our mothers, locked with mine, steady and unwavering. Your kindness isn't weakness. It's their loss, not yours. We're going to fix this together. Her confidence was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. I clung to it, drawing strength from her certainty when my own had been reduced to shreds. Okay, I said, squaring my shoulders. Tell me what to do. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. First, I called my bank and canceled all the shared access I'd given David to monitor my accounts. The customer service representative was helpful but concerned. Mrs. Harmon, are you sure you want to remove your son from all these accounts? He's been authorized for quite some time. I'm quite sure, I said firmly. In fact, I'd like to open entirely new accounts and transfer my funds there. And I'd like to change all my passwords and security questions. Next, I called the credit card companies where I'd made them authorized users and revoked their privileges. One representative asked if there had been fraudulent charges I wanted to report. No, I said after a moment's hesitation. Not fraudulent exactly, just unauthorized in spirit, if not in letter. I blocked their numbers on my phone, changed my email password, and scheduled an appointment with my own attorney. Not David's friend who specialized in elder law, but Janet Kowalski, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who had handled Zinnia's affairs for years. Financial exploitation of seniors is unfortunately common, Janet told me during our consultation, her expression both sympathetic and professional. And it's even more common when it's family members doing the exploiting. They have access, they have trust, and they often have a sense of entitlement to the senior's assets. What can I do to protect myself? I asked, feeling a flicker of hope. Quite a lot, actually, Janet replied, pulling out a legal pad. We'll start by creating a revocable trust for your assets with clear provisions for your care. We'll update your will, removing David as executor and naming someone you trust implicitly, perhaps your sister. We'll set up a financial power of attorney and healthcare directive, naming someone other than your son. And we'll document this conversation and the reasons for these changes in case there's ever a challenge to your competency. The implication was clear. David might claim I was mentally incompetent when he discovered I'd cut him off. The thought was both infuriating and deeply sad. That my own son would question my sanity rather than acknowledge his own wrongdoing spoke volumes about how far our relationship had deteriorated. When the day of Tyler's birthday dinner arrived, I wasn't there. I sent no gift, no card, no explanation for my absence. Instead, I was touring retirement communities with Zinnia. Not the affordable assisted living facility David had suggested, but vibrant, active communities where I could have both independence and security. This one has an art studio for residents, the tour guide at Oakwood Village mentioned, showing us a bright, airy space filled with easels and a wall of completed paintings. Several professional artists live here, and they offer classes for all skill levels. I felt a spark of interest, something positive stirring inside me for the first time since the devastating phone call. It was a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility in a life I thought had been closed off. Do they have exhibitions? I asked the guide as we toured the retirement community. Twice a year, the guide confirmed. We also partner with the community college for special workshops. Many residents find they have more time to pursue their artistic passions here. By the end of the day, I had placed a deposit on a one-bedroom apartment with a small den that could serve as my studio. The community offered 24-hour security, a dining room for when I didn't feel like cooking, transportation to medical appointments, and shopping, and, most importantly, a sense of community I hadn't experienced since Hector passed. It felt like the right place to begin again. Are you sure about this? Zinnia asked as we drove home. It's a big change. I'm sure, I replied, feeling more certain with each passing mile. I need a fresh start. Somewhere they can't find me easily. Somewhere I can build a new life. That night, the emergency calls began. First, it was David, then Natalie, and even Tyler and Iris. Voicemails, text messages, and emails flooded in, all filled with pleas for clarity, claiming misunderstandings. When I didn't respond, they started showing up at my door, knocking at all hours. I stayed with Zinnia until the moving van arrived. We hired a security service to oversee the packing and moving, just in case David or the others tried to interfere. They didn't. But David's car drove slowly past Zinnia's house several times while I stayed, a silent reminder that this wasn't over. I called a realtor about selling my house on my terms. Once it was sold, I put the money into the carefully structured trust Janet had set up, with clear provisions for my care and specific instructions about who could and could not access the funds. The hardest part was changing my phone number, my email address, essentially disappearing from the life I had known. But it was necessary. As Janet had explained, sometimes the only way to stop financial exploitation is to remove yourself completely from the exploiter's reach. I left no forwarding address, no way for them to find me easily. It felt extreme, but after hearing their true feelings, their true intentions, I knew it was the only way to protect myself, both financially and emotionally. The day I moved into Oakwood Village was bittersweet. Zinnia helped me arrange my furniture, hang my paintings, and set up my new studio space. The apartment was smaller than my house, but perfectly adequate for my needs. The east-facing windows in the living room would be perfect for morning painting sessions. "You'll be happy here," Zinnia said as we shared a cup of tea on my new balcony, overlooking a well-tended garden where residents were working among the flower beds. "I can feel it." "I think so too," I replied, and I meant it. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of possibility, of a future that belonged to me alone, not defined by what others wanted from me or expected of me. That night, alone in my new home, I cried for what I had lost. Not the money or possessions, but the illusion of family. The belief that I was loved for who I was rather than for what I could provide. It was a necessary grieving, a letting go of what had never really existed, except in my hopeful imagination. But as I unpacked my painting supplies and set up my easel by the east-facing window where the morning light would be perfect, I felt something else growing alongside the grief. A quiet determination. A sense of reclaiming my life on my own terms. I was 78 years old, but I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. My new apartment in the retirement village faced east, perfect for morning painting sessions. The light streamed in through the large windows, illuminating my easel and the canvas I was working on, a landscape of the garden visible from my balcony. This was my new beginning. The colors were vibrant and alive in a way my earlier work had never quite achieved. It's been 6 months since I disappeared from my old life, 6 months of rebuilding, healing, and discovering who I am when I'm not defined by my relationships to others. Not as Hector's wife, not as David's mother, not as Iris and Tyler's grandmother, but simply as myself, Vivian Harmon, artist, gardener, survivor. The transition wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake, questioning my decision. I wondered if I had overreacted, if there could have been some innocent explanation for what I'd overheard. But those moments grew less frequent as I settled into my new life, as I built new routines, new friendships, new purposes. I reconnected with Milos, who, as it happens, takes a dance class here 3 times a week. Our reunion was awkward at first, me full of apologies for ending things so abruptly, him gracious, but wary. But gradually we've rebuilt our connection, stronger now for having weathered a separation. We're taking things slowly, enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. He makes me laugh, challenges my thinking, and appreciates my art in a way few others ever have. "You paint like someone who has seen both beauty and pain," he told me once, studying a landscape I had just completed. "There's honesty in your brushstrokes." I've made new friends too. Margaret, a retired English professor who leads the book club. Carlos, a widower who tends the community garden and shares his vegetables with anyone who expresses interest. And Elaine, a former ballet dancer who now teaches gentle yoga to residents. They know nothing of my past, the betrayal that led me here. To them, I'm just Vivian, the new resident with a talent for watercolors and a fondness for Earl Grey tea. The financial protections I put in place have proven necessary. David found me eventually. Of course he did. He's my son. He knows my habits, my preferences. He showed up at Oakwood Village one afternoon, charm dialed up to maximum, with a bouquet of lilies, my favorite. He remembered that at least. Mom, he said when I met him in the community center, refusing to invite him to my apartment. We've been so worried. Why did you disappear like that? Why won't you return our calls? I looked at my son, my only child, the baby I had nursed and nurtured, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes, the man I had helped through college and his first apartment, and felt a complex mixture of love and weariness. I think you know why, David, I said quietly. I don't, he insisted, his expression a perfect mask of confusion and concern. We've been frantic. Natalie's been beside herself. The kids keep asking when they'll see their grandma again. You forgot to hang up the phone, I said simply. After you asked me for money for Tyler's birthday dinner. I heard everything. You, Natalie, the kids. I heard what you really think of me. What you've been planning. His face went through a remarkable series of transformations, shock, denial, calculation, and finally, a kind of resigned acknowledgement. Mom, you misunderstood. We were just... Please don't, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the pain lancing through my heart. Don't insult my intelligence by lying to me now. I heard you call me stupid and weak. I heard your plans for my house, my retirement account, Hector's insurance money. I heard it all, David. He was silent for a long moment, his hands fidgeting with the cellophane around the lilies. We're family, he said finally, as if that explained everything, excused everything. Yes, we are, I agreed. Which is why it hurts so much to hear how you really feel about me. Family should be about love, respect, and support, not exploitation. We do love you, he protested, but it sounded hollow, even to my ears, more of a reflexive defense than a heartfelt declaration. Perhaps, I conceded, but not enough to treat me with dignity, with basic human respect. Not enough to see me as a person rather than a resource. What do you want from me, Mom? His voice was tinged with frustration, the edge beginning to show. An apology, I said firmly. I'm sorry. We all are. Now, can we move past this? Come home. We miss you. I am home, I said, gesturing to the community center around us, the garden visible through the large windows. This is where I live now. As for what I want from you, I continued, nothing, David. I don't want or need anything from you. The shock on his face was almost comical. The idea that I might not need him, that I might not be desperate for his attention and approval, had clearly never occurred to him. You can't be serious, he said. You're just going to cut us off. Your own family. I'm not cutting you off, I clarified. I'm establishing boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it will be on new terms. Terms that include mutual respect and honesty. No more financial requests. No more manipulation. No more treating me like I'm incompetent or stupid. And if we don't agree to these terms, he challenged, the hardness I had heard in his voice during that fateful phone call surfacing once more. Then we don't have a relationship, I said simply. It's your choice. He left without resolving anything. The lilies lay abandoned on the table between us. I haven't heard from him directly since. However, Natalie called once, her voice dripping with false concern, asking if I was getting the help I needed. Tyler sent a text suggesting we talk about what's really going on. Iris left a voicemail full of tears and recriminations about how I'd abandoned the family. I didn't respond to any of them. The ball was in their court now. If they wanted a genuine relationship based on love rather than financial gain, they knew where to find me. I'm not holding my breath, but I've left the door slightly ajar just in case. Sometimes I think about them, David and his family. I wonder if they ever truly loved me, or if I was always just a resource to be managed, a checkbook with a heartbeat. I hope the grandchildren will someday become better people than their parents, that they might recognize the emptiness of a life built on taking rather than giving. But I no longer wait by the phone. Instead, I focus on the life I'm building here. I've joined a more serious art group and even sold a few paintings at the community's biannual exhibition. I've started volunteering at the local elementary school, teaching art to third graders who approach their canvases with unself-conscious joy. I've made friends who value me for my company, my conversation, my perspective, not for what I can give them materially. Family isn't about blood, I've learned. It's about respect and love without conditions or price tags. Zinnia visits weekly, bringing gossip and pastries from the bakery I love. Milos and I have dinner every Saturday, taking turns cooking or trying new restaurants in town. Carlos brings me tomatoes from the garden. Margaret loans me books she thinks I'll enjoy. Elaine has convinced me to try yoga, despite my arthritic knees. This is my family now, chosen rather than born into, built on mutual care rather than obligation or exploitation. It's not what I expected at this stage of life. Not the future I planned when Hector and I sat on our porch discussing retirement, watching David play with his children on our lawn. But it's a good life, a life with dignity and purpose. At 78, I'm finally living for myself, painting my days in colors of my own choosing. The canvas of my remaining years is mine to fill. No longer a backdrop for others' desires, but a work of art in its own right, vibrant with possibility, rich with hard-won wisdom. Each morning, as the sun rises and light floods my east-facing windows, I set up my easel, select my brushes, and begin again. Stroke by stroke, choice by choice, I reclaim my life, my worth, my joy. And in that act of creation, I find a freedom I never knew was possible. The freedom to be fully, unapologetically myself. It's never too late to start over. What new beginning are you contemplating? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories of resilience and transformation. If Vivian's journey touched you, please share this story with someone who might need to hear its message of hope and self-realization.